I still remember how the envelope felt in my hands. Too stiff, too formal, like something meant for a stranger. It wasn't handwritten, it wasn't even addressed with warmth. Just printed letters to Mrs. Evelyn Brooks. That's me. That's always been me. But somehow, in that moment, reading the invitation to my own son's 30th birthday party, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like an afterthought. No phone call. No, hey mom, I'd love for you to be there. Just a thick white envelope delivered 3 days before the event. I stared at it for longer than I care to admit. Inside was a card that read, "Please join us to celebrate Daniel's 30th. Dress semi-formal, backyard dinner at 6 p.m. No, love Daniel. No, can't wait to see you." Just a line at the bottom that said, "Guests enter through side gate to the backyard." I let that sit with me for a while. Side gate? I'd raised that boy with scraped knees and midnight fevers. Stayed up through finals. Worked double shifts when his father left. Paid for his college education without asking for a dime in return. And now? I was just another guest. Another head to count. Someone meant to slip in quietly, preferably unseen. I called him that night. Voicemail. I thought about not going. I really did. But something inside me said, go. See for yourself. Because some things, they're too painful to assume. You need to feel them up close to know they're real. So I circled the date, pressed my nicest dress, and told myself, it's just a party. What could go wrong? But deep down, I already knew. Something had changed, and not in my favor. The day of the party, I took my time getting ready. Not because I was nervous, but because I needed the ritual. The quiet hum of the curling iron, the soft click of my earrings as they settled against my neck, the subtle scent of lavender from the perfume I only wear on meaningful days. This wasn't just about looking presentable. It was about reminding myself who I am. Because when the world starts treating you like you're invisible, you learn how to show up like a spotlight. I chose a deep navy dress, the kind that skims the body without asking for attention, a pair of low heels that whispered strength, and a silver bracelet my son gave me on his high school graduation day, back when he still called me Mama instead of Evelyn. I looked in the mirror and nodded. You are not less, I told myself out loud. You are not optional. By 5:45, I pulled up outside Daniel's house. There were already cars lining the street. Laughter echoed from the backyard. Lights twinkled on string cords overhead, like stars someone had pulled down just for the occasion. I walked to the front door, because that's what people who belong do. But when I reached for the handle, it didn't turn. Locked. I knocked gently. Nothing. Knocked again, louder this time. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there stood Lindsay, Daniel's wife. She looked me up and down, eyebrows arched just enough to sting. "Oh, Evelyn, hi. I think everyone's already in the backyard." I smiled, tightly. I figured I'd say hello first. She hesitated. "Well, we're kind of keeping the front for just the immediate setup. Guests were asked to use the side gate." I paused. She didn't say it rudely, but she said it like a gatekeeper, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Right," I said quietly. "I saw that on the card." "You understand, of course, just trying to keep things flowing smoothly." I gave her a polite nod and stepped back down the porch. But every step toward the side gate felt heavier than the last. Because it wasn't just a shortcut, it was a message. A message that said, "You're not the main character here anymore." But I didn't crumble, because I wasn't there for approval. I was there for clarity. And what I was about to find would give me more than I ever expected. The side gate creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a backyard dressed up like a magazine cover, white canopies, tables with gold-rimmed name cards, a live quartet playing soft jazz in the corner. Everything screamed celebration, except the way people looked at me when I walked in. Or rather, how they didn't. Eyes skimmed past me like I was part of the landscaping. A few gave tight-lipped smiles, the kind you give to someone you don't quite remember but know you're supposed to acknowledge. No one said my name. No one waved me over. It was like I had slipped in through the cracks of a party I was never meant to attend. Daniel wasn't in sight, But Lindsay was, floating between tables, air-kissing relatives from her side of the family like a socialite hosting a charity gala. She saw me, I know she did, but turned her head just enough to avoid contact. That's when I saw the seating chart. A big fancy board near the bar with everyone's names written in delicate calligraphy. I scanned it slowly, feeling my chest tighten more with each row. Table 1, Lindsay's parents. Table 2, Daniel's coworkers. Table 3, high school friends. I found my name tucked near the bottom. Table 7, in the corner, right next to the outdoor heaters. No one else I knew. Just a scattering of distant family members and someone labeled +1. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't logistics. This was intentional. Daniel, my son, had helped plan this. He'd seen the list. He'd approved the tables. He'd allowed me to be placed like an afterthought at a party I had sacrificed half my life to make possible. I felt a heat rise in my throat, not from anger, but from shame. Not because I wasn't important, but because I had allowed myself to forget that I was. Still, I sat down at table 7, not because I accepted it, but because I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. Quiet, cold, and painfully, unmistakably clear. I was not welcome. Not by them. Not in this version of my son's life. Not unless I stayed quiet, small, and out of the way. But they didn't know. I hadn't stayed small for decades just to remain that way. I sat at table 7 with my hands folded neatly in my lap. The jazz continued playing. People toasted champagne, and my son, my own son, had yet to say a word to me. The server passed by with hors d'oeuvres, avoiding eye contact. I reached for one, more out of habit than hunger. "Oh, those are for tables 1 through 3, the young man said gently. "You'll get the next round, ma'am." He wasn't rude, just informed, like someone had given him very specific instructions. I smiled politely. "Thank you." He hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "Honestly, I think the lady in the white dress is being super picky about who gets what. We've had to rearrange trays 3 times." Lady in the white dress. Lindsay, of course. She hadn't just planned the decor and the guest list. She'd micromanaged access to food. That was when I noticed something else. There were waitstaff who avoided certain tables. The heaters near table 7 had run out of gas, and no one was refilling them. A distant aunt whispered to her friend while glancing in my direction, the kind of whisper you feel even when you can't hear it. It was a game, an unspoken hierarchy, and I was placed exactly where they wanted me, on the edge. But life has a funny way of revealing cracks when people try too hard to paint over the truth. The same caterer came by again, flustered this time. He dropped a fork and bent quickly to retrieve it. As he stood back up, he muttered, more to himself than to me, "This whole setup is ridiculous. They've got the guy who paid for the house sitting next to the trash cans." I blinked. "What did you say?" He looked at me, startled. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I thought you were one of the guests. I overheard the host earlier. Something about your husband paying for the down payment? That it was awkward you were invited at all?" My heart went still. They didn't know. They didn't know the full truth. It wasn't my husband who paid for the house. It was me. After he left us, after the divorce, I took over the mortgage. I worked weekends, skipped vacations, and even pulled from my retirement to make sure Daniel had a stable roof over his head when he got married. That house was part of me. And now I was being treated like an intruder on land I had once bled to protect. The caterer backed away, apologizing again. But it was too late. Not because he upset me, but because he had confirmed something I needed to know. They weren't just being cold. They were rewriting the past and erasing me from it. Dinner had just begun. Platters were passed around, roasted vegetables, prime rib, tiny desserts in glass cups. I ate quietly, unnoticed, like a stranger at someone else's wedding. Daniel finally appeared at the head table, dressed sharp in a tailored navy suit, his hair slicked back just like his father used to wear it. He looked happy, comfortable, and so very far away from the boy who used to run into my room at 2 a.m. after a nightmare, clutching his blanket and whispering, "Mama?" When everyone was settled, Lindsay stood and tapped her glass. If I could have everyone's attention. Silence fell. I just want to take a moment to thank you all for being here to celebrate my incredible husband. Daniel, you are the most hardworking, passionate, generous man I've ever met. A round of soft applause. You've built an amazing career, an amazing life, and everything you are is because of your determination, your drive, and the way you rise above. More applause. I sat still, expression frozen, wondering when, or if, I'd be mentioned. Then Daniel stood. He smiled sheepishly, lifting his glass. Wow. Thank you, babe. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. I feel really lucky.
A pause. I want to thank a few people in particular. Lindsay, obviously. Your support is everything. My colleagues, you guys push me to be better every day. My in-laws, thank you for welcoming me into your family. He continued. A few friends, his boss, his coach from college. Each person got a heartfelt nod, a memory, a moment, and then, to the people who made me who I am today, you know who you are. I wouldn't be here without you. He raised his glass. And that was it. No mom, no mother, no Evelyn, just a vague acknowledgement lost in a sea of politeness, the kind you give when you want to seem grateful, without actually being it. The room clapped. Some people teared up. But me? I sat still, fork untouched, eyes fixed on a centerpiece I could no longer see through the blur. That was the moment it truly sank in. I had been erased. Not forgotten, not overlooked. Erased. Like my sacrifices were a footnote, like my presence was a formality. They had rewritten the narrative, made him the self-made man, the golden husband, the one who rose above. And I had become a shadow in my own son's story. But what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was that the story wasn't over. And I was about to turn the page. The toasts had ended, the music picked up, and guests began drifting toward the dance floor, laughing, chatting, sipping from their glasses. I stayed seated, still, silent, somewhere between heartbreak and numbness. That's when a man I didn't recognize walked over to my table. He looked to be in his late 30s, sharply dressed, with a warm, open face. He held a drink in one hand, the other tucked casually in his pocket. "Excuse me," he said kindly. "Are you Evelyn Brooks?" I blinked. "Yes." He smiled wide. "I thought so. I just wanted to say thank you." I furrowed my brow. "I'm sorry?" "I work at Langston Consulting," he said. "You don't know me, but your name came up once during a boardroom conversation. Daniel mentioned you in passing, said you used to be in corporate strategy before you went independent." I stared, caught off guard. "He said you were the reason he even knew what a business pitch looked like before college, that you used to let him watch your Zoom calls, make flashcards for him from your notes." He chuckled. "Said you were tougher than any MBA professor he ever had." My lips parted, but I couldn't speak. Daniel had told someone that? This stranger, someone I had never met, knew about things Daniel himself had never once acknowledged in public. The late nights, the case studies I printed for him in high school, the mock presentations we practiced in our kitchen with a whiteboard and dry erase markers. "I just wanted to shake your hand," the man said, reaching out. "You raised a good one." I took his hand, stunned. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." He smiled again, nodded, and disappeared into the crowd. And just like that, something inside me shifted. Because even if my son didn't say my name in that toast, someone still saw me. Someone who didn't owe me anything. Someone who had no reason to flatter me. Someone who, with one sentence, reminded me that truth has a way of leaking through cracks, no matter how polished the surface looks. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to myself, not to the people who mattered, and certainly not to the people who thought they could build their castles on top of my foundation and pretend I wasn't there. After the stranger walked away, I stayed seated for a while, watching the swirl of conversation and clinking glasses. But now, I was watching with different eyes. Eyes that saw through the silk and the sparkle. eyes that had finally remembered what strength looked like, and then I noticed her. Aunt Claire. Sitting alone by the patio railing, napkin folded neatly in her lap, her lips pressed into a patient smile. No one was speaking to her. Aunt Claire was my late ex-husband's sister, childless, unmarried, but always fiercely loyal. When Daniel was young, she used to take him to the museum on Saturdays. She helped with school projects, gifted him his first real watch, and yet here she was, placed at a table even further from the center than mine. Tucked away, like clutter. I stood and made my way over to her. "Claire," I said softly. She looked up and immediately smiled, though her eyes were tired. "Evelyn, I was wondering when someone would remember I was here." We both chuckled, quietly, bitterly. "They didn't even offer me cake," she added. "I had to go ask." We sat together for a while, two ghosts at a party that only wanted the new version of the family, polished, presentable, profitable. "I don't belong here anymore," Claire said finally. "But I came anyway, for him." I nodded. "Me too." She turned to me then, her voice lower. "You know, when Lindsay's mother first started planning this, she sent me an email asking if I could refrain from speaking too long at the party." "Why?" Claire's lips curled. "She said it might confuse people, that they wouldn't understand my role in Daniel's life, that I wasn't immediate family." My jaw clenched. That wasn't just thoughtless. That was surgical exclusion, not just of me, but of anyone who had helped shape Daniel's past, anyone who wasn't part of the image they wanted to sell now. "You were more of a parent to him than half the people clinking glasses tonight," I whispered. Claire reached for my hand. "And so were you. Don't let this party make you forget that." We sat in silence, two women who had held the line for years, only to be pushed out the door the moment it was convenient. But something had changed in me. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was awake. They had made a mistake. They thought pushing us to the edge would keep the spotlight on them. What they didn't realize was, sometimes the spotlight follows the truth. And the truth was about to find its voice. As the sky darkened and fairy lights began to glow across the backyard, a large canvas banner was unfurled above the main table. It read, "Happy 30th Daniel, Visionary, Leader, Legacy." People clapped, cameras flashed, and someone from Lindsay's family pulled out a selfie stick to record the moment. Legacy. I stared at that word for a long time. Funny how they used it so freely. As if it was a gift that appeared from thin air, as if legacies weren't built by someone else's tired hands. I walked slowly toward the banner, staying at a distance, standing under a tree near the back fence. From there, I could see it all. Daniel accepting hugs, receiving a custom gold watch, laughing at stories that all started with, "Remember when?" But none of those stories seemed to include the years I had stitched together with threads of sacrifice. And then I saw it. The corner of the banner had curled back slightly in the evening breeze. Behind it, in smaller print, almost like a manufacturer's watermark, were the words, "Designed by Lindsay and family." Of course, even the banner had been claimed. No mention of Daniel's real beginnings. No nod to the single mother who helped him buy his first car. No photo of us at his high school graduation, when I stood alone in the bleachers with tears pouring down my face, because he had made it, and so had I. I wanted to walk away. Part of me even reached for my purse, but I didn't, because walking away would make this feel like their stage, and I wasn't a guest in this story. I was the architect, the soil under their party shoes. I tilled that, the roof above their catered celebration. I helped build it, and the man they were celebrating? He came from me. Not from her side of the family, not from the company he worked for, from me. So I stayed, not to be bitter, not to make a scene, but to make sure that I didn't let another moment pass where I forgot who I was just to keep other people comfortable. That banner didn't have my name on it, but the truth was printed all over this night. They just didn't know how to read it. I was still standing near the back fence when I heard the microphone crackle. Another toast. But this time it wasn't Daniel or Lindsay. It wasn't anyone I expected. It was Julia, Daniel's old friend from high school, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who used to eat dinner at our house every Friday during senior year. She held the mic with confidence, standing tall in a simple black dress, her curls pinned back, her voice steady. I wasn't on the schedule to speak, but I asked Lindsay if I could say a few words, and she kindly agreed. That was clearly a lie. Lindsay's polite smile in the corner looked strained. I've known Daniel since we were both awkward teenagers trying to survive Algebra 2, and one thing I've always admired about him is how grounded he's remained, no matter what success has come his way. A few nods. Applause. But if we're going to talk about legacy, we need to be honest about roots. And Daniel's roots? They start with one of the most remarkable women I've ever met. My heart stopped. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, turning to scan the crowd until her eyes found me. "Evelyn, I don't know if you remember this, but you once drove an hour through a snowstorm to pick me up when my mom forgot I had a debate competition. You packed me snacks. You even ironed my blouse." The crowd went quiet. "You weren't just Daniel's mother. You were everyone's second mom. You showed us what structure looked like, what hustle looked like, what love with boundaries looked like." My eyes blurred again, but not from shame this time. I know tonight's supposed to be about Daniel, and he deserves every bit of this celebration. But pretending he got here alone would be a lie. People started murmuring. Julia didn't stop. "We honor greatness not just by praising outcomes, but by acknowledging foundations. And Evelyn Brooks? You're the foundation." She raised her glass toward me. "To the woman who made legacy possible, even if her name wasn't printed on the banner." I don't remember standing. I don't remember the moment my table mates turned to look at me with wide eyes. All I remember was the sound of chairs shifting and glasses clinking and something warm breaking open in my chest. Someone had said it, the thing I didn't have the power or permission to say. And they couldn't take it back, not this time. When Julia finished her toast, the air in the backyard shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. Like a glass just cracked and no one could unhear the sound. Some people clapped, others exchanged tight glances, but I wasn't watching them. I was watching Daniel. He had frozen midway through a sip of wine, his expression unreadable. He looked confused, like someone had just opened a door he didn't remember closing. For a few seconds, our eyes locked, and I saw it. The flicker. Not just of recognition, but of remorse. The way his shoulders sank just a little, the way his jaw clenched like he was trying not to speak too quickly, the way he looked away, then looked back again, as if he finally saw me. Not as the woman at table 7, not as the guest who slipped in through the side gate, but as his mother, the woman who once spooned cough syrup into his mouth at 3 a.m., who stapled college scholarship packets while eating instant noodles at her desk, who clapped the loudest at his first job offer, even when he barely texted back. He put down his glass. I could feel the tension unraveling across the lawn. Lindsay whispered something to her father, who didn't look pleased, but Daniel was already moving. He walked toward me slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. When he reached me, he didn't say anything at first. He looked at me the way sons look at their mothers when they finally understand something that took too long to learn. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. I gave him a half smile. "Would you have listened?" He lowered his eyes. "Probably not." A pause. "But I'm listening now." It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was something. An opening. A crack in the distance between us. I didn't hug him, didn't cry, didn't make a scene. I just placed my hand on his wrist and held it there for a moment. "Happy birthday," I said. He nodded. "Thank you. For everything." And that was all I needed in that moment. Not validation from the crowd, not public praise, just the knowledge that my son, still had a piece of the boy who used to run to me barefoot in the summer, still had room for truth, still had space, somewhere inside him, for me. The music faded, the plates were cleared, The polite laughter grew thinner as guests began to trickle out, murmuring thanks and goodbyes. The backyard that had once been buzzing with curated charm was now quiet, vulnerable even. I stood near the edge of the lawn, watching the string lights sway gently in the night breeze, when I heard her footsteps. Lindsay. Her heels clicked with purpose, not rushed, not hesitant. She had the poise of a woman used to owning the room and not being questioned when she did. "Evelyn?" she said with that familiar tight smile. "Can we talk for a moment?" I turned, calm and ready. "Of course." She folded her arms across her chest, tilting her head just slightly. "I just want to say, I didn't expect Julia to make that toast." I nodded. Neither did I. But I'm glad she did. Lindsay's jaw twitched. It wasn't meant to be divisive. This night was supposed to be about Daniel's future, his accomplishments, moving forward. Ah, there it was, the coded language, the thinly veiled reminder that the past, my past with him, was considered inconvenient. "Funny," I said softly, "because I always thought a future without roots was just a balloon waiting to pop." She narrowed her eyes. Daniel needed space to grow, he needed to become his own man, and we felt that bringing up too much of the past would complicate things. We. There it was again. Not Daniel. We. I realized, in that moment, just how much of the rewriting had been orchestrated, not by time or forgetfulness, but by design. "I understand," I said. "It's just strange how much of that past funded your present." Her lips parted slightly. No words came. I wasn't angry, just done pretending. "You don't have to like me, Lindsay," I continued, "but don't erase me. Not when the foundation you're standing on has my fingerprints in the cement." She glanced away, arms still crossed, face tight. "Daniel respects you," she finally muttered. "I know. He remembered tonight. You didn't have to make a scene." I laughed under my breath. "Lindsay?" I didn't say a word. And that was the truth. I hadn't stood on a chair. I hadn't demanded attention. I hadn't interrupted her plans. I had simply existed, fully, unapologetically, and that, more than anything else, had shaken her. She gave a slight nod, the kind you give when you realize you've lost control of the room, then turned and walked back inside. And I stayed there, under the lights, knowing one thing. My silence had spoken louder than her entire party. I woke up early the next morning, still in my party dress, still half in a dream. Not a good dream, not a bad one, just a memory trying to make sense of itself. Sunlight poured through the blinds, slicing across the hardwood floor like thin lines of judgment. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message. From Daniel. I blinked, unsure if I was imagining it. "Mom, I couldn't sleep. Can we talk later today?" It was simple. Director? No emojis? No deflection. But it was also the first text I had gotten from him in weeks. Months, if I was being honest with myself. I stared at it for a long time. Because buried inside those 12 words was something I hadn't dared to hope for anymore. An invitation. Not just to talk, but to return. To a place where I wasn't filtered, scheduled, or pushed to the corner table. I didn't respond right away. I needed to sit with it. To make sure my reply came from strength, not desperation. Instead, I stood up, made tea, and opened my notebook. For years, I had been journaling quietly, not for anyone else, just for me. And this morning, I wrote only one sentence. Even bricks covered in moss still remember the hands that laid them. I was the moss-covered brick in their story. Old, weathered, easy to overlook, but I was there at the base of it all. And now, maybe, just maybe, Daniel had started to see that. A few hours later, I texted him back. "Of course, I'll be home after 3. He responded almost instantly. "I'll bring coffee." "Your usual?" And just like that, something inside me softened. Not everything had changed. Not everything was healed. But the distance had cracked. The silence had lifted. And while I didn't know where this new chapter would lead, I knew one thing. He still remembered my usual. Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the heaviest truths. Daniel arrived at 3:12 p.m., 2 coffees in hand, oat milk, no sugar, just the way I liked it. Same as when he was 15 and used to sneak sips from mine, claiming he hated it, but finishing half the cup anyway. He didn't knock. Just let himself in with the spare key I always told him to keep, even when months passed without him using it. "Hey, Mom?" His voice was quieter than I remembered. Not hesitant, just stripped of the performance he wore so easily last night. I gestured to the couch. "You remember where it is?" He smiled faintly and sat. We didn't talk right away. We sipped our coffees in silence, the room humming with everything unspoken. Finally, he looked up. "I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow. "For?" He sighed, leaned forward, rubbed the back of his neck, the way he always did when something weighed on him. "For the speech, the party, the way things have been." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He kept going. "I don't know when I started treating your sacrifices like background noise, or why I let Lindsay curate so much of what should have been a shared moment. That word, curate, hit differently, because it wasn't just about decorations or seating charts. It was about identity, about who got to exist in his narrative. "I think part of me wanted to feel like I built everything myself," he admitted, "like I'd earned it all clean, no debt, no strings." I nodded. "And letting people see where you came from would have made it feel messy?" He looked at me, eyes soft. It would have made it feel real. And that scared me. Silence again. Then, softly, "You were the reason I even knew what a quarterly report looked like. You coached me through my first internship interview. You paid the down payment on our house. I know that. Lindsay pretends otherwise, but I never forgot." A pause. "I just never said it, because once I did, I'd have to admit I didn't get here alone." That was the truth I had waited 10 years to hear. Not praise, not a grand speech, just accountability, real, raw, honest. I reached over and placed my hand on his. "You didn't get here alone," I said, "but you're here, and that's what matters." He smiled, and for the first time in years, I saw my little boy again, the one who built towers out of cereal boxes and called me his hero. "Thanks, Mom." I squeezed his hand. "Thanks for remembering." That night, I was folding laundry in the living room, soft jazz playing in the background, when my phone lit up. Lindsay. I stared at the screen for a moment. She hadn't texted, she hadn't emailed. And now, after everything, she was calling. I picked up. "Hello?" There was a short pause on the other end. Then, "Hi, Evelyn." I hope I'm not calling too late. Her voice was flat, controlled, the way someone sounds when they've rehearsed their lines in the mirror. "No, it's fine. What's on your mind?" She exhaled sharply, as if deciding how direct she wanted to be. "I heard Daniel came by today." I smiled to myself. "He did. He told me you two had a good conversation." "We did." Another pause. Then the tone shifted. I want to make sure you understand that everything I did for the party came from a place of love. For Daniel. I'm sure you believe that." "Excuse me?" Belief and impact are two different things, Lindsay. You might have believed it was for love. But the impact, on me, on Aunt Claire, even on Daniel, told another story. She didn't respond right away. "You're not the only woman in his life who's helped him, you know." "I never claimed I was." "Then why does it feel like you think I stole something?" I paused. "Because when you remove someone's name from their own story, it's not just forgetting, it's rewriting. You didn't steal his love, you tried to steal the narrative." Her breath caught, not from shock, from realization, because she knew, deep down, she knew. "Daniel's a grown man," she said finally, her voice cooler now. "He can decide who matters." "And last night he remembered?" I didn't say it with spite. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't need to raise its voice. She stayed quiet for a few seconds, then said, "You're not going to make this about you." Number, I'm going to let him make it about truth. That's what he did last night. And today. Then I added softly, and if you really love him, Lindsay, you'll make space for all of who he is, including where he comes from. There was nothing left to say. Good night, Evelyn, she said. Good night. I hung up, and in the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because there wouldn't be more battles, but because the mask had cracked, and the truth had finally gotten a seat at the table. I couldn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because I was clear. There's a strange sort of stillness that comes after a storm you didn't cause but survived anyway. You look around and realize everything is still standing, but now you're different. I went to my home office, sat at my old desk, and opened my laptop. Out of habit, I checked a folder labeled, "To Me." It was where I saved letters and notes I wrote to myself, reminders for later, lifelines during hard seasons. I hadn't opened it in years. One email caught my eye. Dated exactly 5 years ago. Subject line, "In case you ever forget." I clicked it. It was written at 2:17 a.m., judging by the timestamp. I remembered that night. Daniel had just told me Lindsay was pregnant. He'd sounded distant on the phone, formal, like he was calling a distant aunt to announce a promotion. I remember sitting on that same couch, phone still in hand, feeling like I'd just been gently pushed out of a room I had built. The email said, "Dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, you're probably feeling small, like you've been asked to disappear again for the sake of someone else's comfort. But I want you to remember something. You matter. You didn't break your back, your spirit, your sleep cycles just to be forgotten. You built a life from scraps. You carried more than your share, and you did it without asking for applause. One day, they'll remember. One day, they'll look back and realize you weren't the shadow. You were the sun. Until then, don't shrink. Don't edit yourself out of your own life. You are not invisible. You are the proof." I sat back and let the words wash over me. 5 years ago, I had written myself a promise, and last night I had kept it. Without rage, without revenge, just truth, spoken quietly but unapologetically. I replied to that old email with one sentence. They finally saw the sun. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. This time, I slept. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer waiting for permission to exist. 3 days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table halfway through my second cup of coffee when an email popped up from a name I hadn't seen in years, Langston and Partners, Executive Outreach. For a moment, I thought it was spam, or maybe a newsletter I forgot to unsubscribe from. But the subject line made my heart stop. Madam CEO, Legacy Initiative Proposal. I clicked it open, slowly. Dear Ms. Brooks, I hope this message finds you well. After reviewing internal nominations and historical performance records, our Legacy Initiative Committee has identified you as a foundational figure in the early strategic development of 3 of our current directors, including Daniel Brooks. I blinked. My heart started racing. In recognition of your mentorship, influence, and contributions to leadership pipelines, both formal and informal, we are pleased to offer you an honorary executive consultant title as part of our Legacy Women in Leadership program. You will be formally introduced at the Langston Gala next month. Please let us know if you are open to accepting this honor. Daniel Brooks has confirmed your attendance and will be presenting your award. I read that last line 3 times. Daniel had nominated me. Daniel had confirmed my attendance. And not for some small favor, not for a sympathy seat, but for a moment that would stand in front of hundreds of people, under lights, on a platform where my name had once been scrubbed away. I sat back, stunned. Not because I needed a title, but because I had already made peace with never getting one. This question mark. This was his acknowledgement, not just the coffee visit, not just the apology, but a public declaration that the world would now have to recognize I mattered, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it, and he finally saw that. I replied simply, "It would be my honor. Thank you. Evelyn Brooks." Then I closed the laptop and looked out the window at the garden I'd planted years ago, where nothing grew for the first 2 summers. And now? It was full of lavender and wild roses. Sometimes it just takes time. The Langston Gala was held at a high-rise ballroom overlooking the city's skyline. Crystal chandeliers, white-gloved servers, champagne flutes that caught the light like stars in motion. I hadn't worn a gown in over a decade. But that night, I did. Midnight blue, modest, elegant. With a silver pin that Daniel gave me for Mother's Day when he was 11, I wore it over my heart. As I stepped out of the car, I expected to feel nervous, out of place. But I didn't. I felt ready. Inside, the room buzzed with polished confidence. Names I'd only ever seen on annual reports floated by, laughing and sipping. No one rushed to greet me. And still, I walked in with my shoulders back, because for once I didn't need to prove I belonged. I knew I did. Near the stage was a long, formal table with assigned seats. I scanned the name cards, and there it was. Ms. Evelyn Brooks, honoree. Not Daniel's mother, not guest of, just me, my name, in gold script, front and center. I sat down, and moments later, Daniel approached in a black tuxedo. He looked every bit the executive, confident, composed, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "You look beautiful, Mom. You clean up pretty well yourself." He smiled and reached into his jacket. "I wanted you to have this." It was a printed copy of the speech he was about to give, with one line highlighted: "The person who shaped my leadership more than any mentor, manager, or investor was my mother." I held the page in both hands, grounding myself. "Daniel," I whispered, this matters." He nodded. "You taught me what accountability looks like. You held me to a higher standard even when I didn't see it yet. You built the foundation I now stand on." He took his seat beside me. The lights dimmed. The MC began to speak. And when they called my name, not as a guest, but as an honoree, the room clapped, not politely, not out of obligation. They clapped like they meant it, because they saw me now. And maybe, just maybe, they realized what Daniel had finally said out loud, that sometimes the strongest CEOs don't wear suits. They wear resilience. The applause started as a polite ripple. Then someone stood up, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on their feet, clapping, nodding, turning toward me as the spotlight followed my steps toward the stage. I hadn't even risen from my seat yet. They stood before I did. Not because of who I was married to, not because of my title, but because of something rarer. Recognition earned over time. Quiet, unseen, unglamorous work finally stepping into the light. As I walked toward the podium, I felt an odd calm, not nerves, not pressure, just a grounded sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Daniel stood at the edge of the stage, offering his hand to help me up the last step. "Ready?" he whispered. I nodded. "Born ready." The MC smiled as she handed me the microphone. "Tonight, we honor a woman who redefined leadership from behind the scenes. Evelyn Brooks didn't just raise a son, she raised a legacy. And tonight, that legacy stands here, on its own 2 feet. I took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd, faces blurred slightly by the lighting, but energy palpable. "I was once told," I began, "that the strongest work is often invisible, that when you do your job well, no one knows you were even there. For a long time I believed that. I made peace with being the silent architect. But silence is only noble when it's a choice, not when it's expected, and tonight, I choose to speak." I paused. Leadership doesn't always come with corner offices or glossy titles. Sometimes it comes from late nights, overdue bills, and holding your child's world together with one hand while working 2 jobs with the other. Laughter, nods, a few tears. I didn't set out to be a leader. I set out to survive. But in that survival, I became someone stronger, and I see now that strength deserves to be seen. I looked over at Daniel. He smiled, his eyes wet. So to every mother, every woman, every quiet force in the background, your work counts, even when they forget your name, even when they seat you at the back, even when your legacy isn't printed on the banner. Tonight I accept this honor, not as a final chapter, but as a reminder that no truth stays buried forever. I stepped back, and they clapped again, louder this time. Not because I demanded their attention, but because I had finally allowed myself to take up space. The gala wound down slowly, the way only big nights do, with people clinging to the magic just a little longer than necessary. Photos were taken, hands were shaken, glasses were refilled, compliments were exchanged. But eventually, the room emptied. And it was just me and Daniel, standing by the edge of the balcony that overlooked the city. The lights below sparkled like a constellation of every moment we never spoke, now finally catching up to us. He leaned on the railing, took a breath, then turned to me. No cameras, no crowd, just mother and son. You know, for years I told myself I didn't want to owe anyone. I glanced at him, letting the silence give him room. I thought if I made it on my own, it would mean more, that it would validate everything I sacrificed. He looked down, voice softer now. But I didn't sacrifice half as much as you did. I just never knew how to say it. I placed a hand on his back gently. You just said it. He shook his head, like that wasn't enough. Number, I need to say more. He straightened up, looked me directly in the eye. I was wrong to let Lindsay push you out of things. I was wrong to let your name fade in rooms where it should have echoed. I was wrong to pretend you were just the woman who raised me. You were the strategist behind my first pitch, the editor behind my first resume, the voice behind every big decision I ever made. He swallowed. You didn't just make me. You made this. All of it. I didn't cry. Because it wasn't a moment for tears, it was a moment for witnessing. Finally, after all this time, he saw me. Fully, clearly, freely. Thank you, I said simply. He smiled, then leaned closer and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll always be my CEO." And in that moment, I didn't feel like a guest in his life. I felt like family again, not just by blood, but by truth. A week after the gala, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No logo, no return address, just my name, handwritten in clean, confident strokes, Evelyn Brooks. Inside was a single card, embossed in gold across the center. Legacy Award, Leadership, Impact, Vision, presented to Evelyn Brooks, Honorary Executive Consultant below, in smaller script, for shaping generations through invisible leadership, unshakable grace, and undeniable strength. I held the card between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, not in paper, but in meaning. Not because I needed accolades, not because I ever asked for recognition, but because after years of being asked to step aside, to stay quiet, to be grateful for scraps of presence, this was mine. And it wasn't just the award, it was the full circle, the acknowledgement, the reclamation, the rewriting of a story in which I had always been central, even when others tried to erase me from the frame. That weekend, Daniel invited me to dinner, just the two of us. No table assignments, no toasts, just home-cooked pasta, red wine, and his old record player humming in the background. At one point, he raised his glass. "To the original architect," he said. "To the woman who taught me everything I needed, and everything I forgot." I clinked his glass and smiled. "To remembering." Later that night, as I drove home, I passed by the old office building where I once temped on night shifts, the same one where I used to sit in the break room at 3 a.m., calculating how many more hours I'd need to afford Daniel's school supplies. It was still there. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was no longer surviving. I was seen. I was named, and I was whole. Not because I clawed my way into the spotlight, but because I waited with grace. And when the moment finally came, I stepped into it with both feet. So yes, they once told me to use the back door. They once looked past me, over me, around me, but now, when they see me, they don't whisper, "Who's that?" They stand, they clap, and someone always says, "That's Madam CEO."